The massive conference room fell silent as Commander Zexloth entered. His forearms moved with careful precision, each step echoing off the metal walls. Scars covered his reptilian face, and where his left eye should have been, a red cybernetic implant glowed softly in the dim light. The 12 alien species sitting around the circular table watched him with respect and fear. Zexloth had fought in more wars than most beings could count. He was a legend among the Kethmari people, a warrior who had conquered entire star systems for the galactic hegemony. But today, something was different about him. His usually proud shoulders seemed heavy, and his voice carried a weight that made the other delegates lean forward. "Honored members of the War Council," Zexloth began, his voice rough like grinding stones. "You have called me here to discuss the newest target for our expansion, a small blue planet called Earth, populated by creatures called humans." The holographic display in the center of the table flickered to life. Earth appeared, spinning slowly, its blue oceans and white clouds looking peaceful and beautiful. Several delegates made dismissive sounds. To them, it looked like every other primitive world they had conquered over the past 1,000 years. "The intelligence reports say these humans are Class 7 primitives," continued Admiral Threshold, her tentacles waving with excitement. "They have barely left their own planet. They still use chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. This should be easier than the Veltar conquest last year." Other delegates nodded in agreement. General Mordex, his insect-like face clicking with amusement, spoke up. "Our standard fleet of 50,000 ships should be more than enough. We have never needed more than 10,000 for any previous conquest." Zexloth stood perfectly still, letting them talk. His cybernetic eye focused on each speaker, recording their words and confident expressions. When the room finally fell quiet, he clicked his mandibles together in what his species called a death laugh. "Honored delegates," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "I am the sole surviving commander from the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet that was sent to conquer Earth 6 months ago." The silence that followed was complete. 12 different species, each from different worlds with different atmospheres, all held their breath at the same time. The implications of his words settled over them like a cold fog. "That is impossible," whispered Counselor Yathara, her crystalline body shimmering with disbelief. "The 3rd Fleet had 50,000 ships, the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. You are saying that primitive humans destroyed all but one?" Zexloth nodded slowly. "Not destroyed. That word is too simple for what happened to us. They broke us in ways that our language has no words for. They took apart our entire understanding of what war means." He activated his own holographic display, showing images that made several delegates recoil in shock. Ships twisted into impossible shapes, battle stations that looked like they had been carved apart by invisible knives, wreckage floating in space that defied explanation. "The war lasted 6 months," Zexloth continued. "In all our previous conquests, the longest resistance lasted 3 weeks. The Veltar held out for 18 days before surrendering. The mighty Krexion warriors fought for 12 days, but humans fought for 6 months, and at the end, they were stronger than when we started." General Mordex's chittering grew agitated. "What kind of weapons do they possess? Some unknown technology? Energy shields we cannot penetrate?" Zexloth's laugh was bitter. "They use metal tubes that fire small pieces of lead. They fly in machines with wings like ancient birds. Their most powerful weapons are chemical explosives. By every measure we understand, they should have been defeated in hours." "Then how?" demanded Admiral Threshold, her tentacles now writhing with confusion rather than excitement. Zexloth was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost afraid. "Because we measured everything except the one thing that matters. We counted their ships, their weapons, their numbers. We studied their technology and their tactics. But we never bothered to measure their will." He gestured to his scarred face, to the cybernetic replacements for body parts lost in battle. "I have fought against the fiercest warriors in the galaxy, the Krexion, who are born with weapons for hands, The Veltar, who can survive in the vacuum of space. The Horthang, who feel no pain and know no fear. But none of them prepared me for fighting creatures who choose to feel pain and fear, and then choose to fight anyway. The room was so quiet that the only sound was the soft humming of the life support systems. Each delegate was thinking about their own species, about how they approached war and conflict. In every case, when the cost became too high, when survival was threatened, surrender was the logical choice. Humans do not think like us, Zexloth said, his cybernetic eye glowing brighter. When we cornered their soldiers, they did not surrender. When we destroyed their cities, they did not break. When we killed their leaders, more appeared. And when we thought we had finally won. He paused, his 4 hands clenching into fists. When we thought we had finally won, we realized we had not been fighting a war at all. We had been walking into a trap that was 6 months in the making. Counselor Yithara's crystalline form was flickering with nervous energy. What do you recommend we do? Should we send a larger fleet? Perhaps 100,000 ships? Zexloth looked at each delegate in turn. His gaze lingered on the younger ones, the ones who had never seen real war, who thought conquest was just a matter of having bigger guns and more ships. I recommend, he said slowly, that you listen to the rest of my story before making any decisions, because what I have told you so far is not the frightening part. The frightening part is how the war ended, and what the humans offered us when they had won. He moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back at the 12 most powerful military leaders in the galaxy. The frightening part, he said, is that they offered us friendship. The next morning, Zexloth returned to the council chambers. The delegates had spent the night reviewing files about Earth and humans, trying to understand what they might be missing. When the Kethmari commander entered, his movements seemed even more careful than before, as if he was carrying invisible weights. Yesterday I told you that 50,000 ships became one. He began without ceremony. Today, I will tell you how it started, and why we should have known from the very first moment that we were making a terrible mistake. The holographic display activated, showing the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet as it had been 6 months ago. Thousands of massive ships, stretching across space like a metal forest. At the center was the flagship, a dreadnought called Time's Inevitable Victory *, large enough to house 1 million soldiers. We followed the same protocol we had used 47 times before, Zexloth explained. We arrived at the edge of their star system and spent 3 days studying their defenses. They had perhaps 200 small space vessels, mostly used for moving between their planet and its moon. Their weapons were primitive projectile systems. Their armor was simple metal plating. General Mordex clicked his approval. Standard procedure. Know your enemy before you strike. That was our first mistake, Zexloth said quietly. We thought we knew our enemy. We thought humans were just another species of intelligent animals who would see our power and submit. We were so very wrong. The display changed to show Earth as the hegemony fleet approached. Blue and green and beautiful. With no visible planetary defenses. No orbital weapons platforms. No shield generators. To the alien fleet, it looked defenseless. We began with the demonstration phase, Zexloth continued. The Times, Inevitable Victory Times and 12 escort dreadnoughts decloaked above their major population centers. New York, Beijing, London, Moscow. We broadcast surrender demands in their languages, showing them our firepower, demanding they submit to hegemony rule. Admiral Threshold's tentacles curled with interest. Standard protocol. How did they respond? Zexloth's cybernetic eye dimmed slightly, as if the memory was painful to access. They laughed. Laughed? Counselor Yithara's crystalline body flickered with confusion. They were afraid and making sounds to comfort themselves? Aeon. All the Mation. These Mation. Aeon. No, Zexloth said, shaking his head slowly. They were genuinely amused. Our communication officers intercepted thousands of their radio transmissions. Humans were making jokes about our ships. They called them movie spaceships. and began betting on whether we would demand their leaders or probe someone's mind. The delegates exchanged confused glances. In 47 previous conquests, fear had always been the first response. Panic, terror, desperate attempts to negotiate or hide. Never laughter. Their leaders appeared on broadcast systems across the planet, Zexloth continued. Instead of begging for mercy, they held what they called press conferences. They told their people that this was probably not a hoax, and began discussing something called First Contact Protocols. They had protocols for meeting alien species? General Mordex's mandibles clicked rapidly. That suggests previous contact. No, Zexloth replied. They had protocols for meeting alien species because they had imagined this moment thousands of times in their stories and films. They had thought about it so much that when it actually happened, they were prepared. The display shifted to show news broadcasts from Earth during those first hours. Humans in uniforms standing calmly behind podiums. Crowds of people in the streets, not running in panic, but pointing at the sky and taking pictures with small devices. One of their leaders, a female called the Secretary General, spoke to our ships directly, Zexloth said. She said, "Welcome to Earth. We hope your intentions are peaceful. But if they are not, we want you to know that we do not surrender easily. We have been practicing for this conversation for a very long time." Counselor Yithara's light flickered faster. Practicing? How does one practice for surrender? Quote, Zexloth was quiet for several moments before answering. They were not practicing surrender. They were practicing war. The implications of this settled over the room like a slow poison. Species that prepared for war were different from species that stumbled into it. They were dangerous in ways that technology could not measure. We proceeded to the next phase, Zexloth continued. Demonstration of power. We selected 12 military installations and destroyed them from orbit using precision beam weapons. Clean, quick destruction to show them our capabilities without excessive loss of life. Merciful and effective, Admiral Threshold approved. What was their response? Silence. The single word hung in the air like a death sentence. Complete radio silence. Zexloth elaborated. No broadcasts, no communications between their cities, no responses to our signals. For 6 hours, the planet went completely quiet. General Mordex leaned forward, his insect features showing confusion. Equipment failure? Were they unable to communicate? No, we monitored their electromagnetic spectrum. Their communication networks were fully functional. They simply chose not to use them where we could hear. Zexloth activated another display, this one showing heat signatures and movement patterns across Earth's surface during those 6 hours of silence. What we saw during those 6 hours should have terrified us, he said. Massive movement of their population, not panic, not random fleeing. Organized evacuation of civilians from major cities. Military units moving to prepared positions that our scans had somehow missed. Supply convoys heading to hidden locations. The pattern became clear as the delegates studied the data. Humanity had not been shocked into paralysis by the alien demonstration. They had been activated. At the end of the 6-hour period, their Secretary General broadcast again. Zexloth continued. She said, "We have considered your demonstration of power. We regret that you have chosen to begin this relationship with violence. We formally reject your demand for surrender. We invite you to leave our system peacefully, or we will defend ourselves." Several delegates made sounds of disbelief. The arrogance of challenging a force thousands of times more powerful seemed beyond comprehension. That was when I should have ordered immediate retreat, Zexloth admitted, his voice heavy with regret. Because in that moment, I realized something that no amount of intelligence gathering had prepared me for. What? Whispered Counselor Yithara. Zexloth looked at each delegate in turn, his scarred face grim with memory. We had not encountered a species that would fight us, he said slowly. We had encountered a species that had been waiting their entire history for the chance to fight something like us. Every story they told, every game they played, every simulation they ran, had been preparation for this moment, He gestured to the peaceful blue planet on the display. We thought we were hunting prey. But from the moment we entered their system, we had been walking into the territory of predators who had spent thousands of years learning how to kill things bigger and stronger than themselves. The room fell silent as the terrible truth settled over them. They had not been preparing to conquer primitives. They had been preparing to fight a species that had been training for war since before they could reach the stars. On the third day, Zexloth arrived at the council chambers carrying a small metal box. The delegates had spent another sleepless night trying to understand what they were hearing. The idea that a primitive species could be more dangerous than advanced civilizations went against everything they thought they knew about warfare. Today I will tell you about the ground campaign, Zexloth began, setting the metal box on the table. And I will explain why. After 47 successful conquests, I learned what the word defeat truly means. The holographic display showed the surface of Earth, focusing on several major continents. Red markers indicated where hegemony forces had landed. Blue markers showed human defensive positions. Phase 3 of our standard protocol is ground deployment, Zexloth explained. We land overwhelming force at strategic locations, capture key infrastructure, and force surrender through demonstration of our superiority. We expected resistance to last perhaps 3 days. General Mordex clicked approvingly. Primitive ground forces cannot stand against orbital support and advanced armor. Even the Krexion warriors surrendered after 8 hours of ground combat. That is what we thought, Zexloth said quietly. We deployed 2 million soldiers across 6 continents. Our battle armor could deflect their projectile weapons. Our vehicles were faster and more powerful than anything they possessed. Our air support was unchallenged. By every measure, we should have achieved victory within hours. The display zoomed in on one of the landing zones, showing the massive hegemony dropships as they touched down in what appeared to be farmland. The first thing that confused us was their response to our landing, Zexloth continued. Human military forces did not mass to attack us directly. Instead, they seemed to fade away. Our sensors detected them, but when we moved to engage, they were gone. It was like fighting smoke. Admiral Threshold's tentacles writhed with interest. Guerrilla tactics? Many species attempt that before surrender. Yes, but humans practiced guerrilla warfare differently. Most species use hit-and-run tactics to avoid losses until they can negotiate surrender. Humans used hit-and-run tactics to maximize our losses while accepting terrible losses of their own. Zexloth touched the metal box with one of his 4 hands, his expression becoming distant with memory. That is when we learned about their doctrine of acceptable losses. Every species we had encountered valued individual survival above all else. When casualties reached 5 to 10%, surrender was inevitable. When losses reached 20%, resistance collapsed entirely. He opened the metal box, revealing several small objects that looked like primitive human military decorations. Humans fight at 90% casualties and call it holding the line. I learned this during 3 encounters that changed my understanding of what warfare means. The display shifted to show a large yellow vehicle traveling down a road. The first encounter was what they called the school bus incident. During our initial advance, we came across one of their transport vehicles carrying 30 young humans away from the combat zone. The vehicle became separated from the evacuation convoy and was surrounded by my forces. Zexloth picked up one of the decorations from the box, a small piece of colored fabric attached to a metal pin. Standard procedure was to capture the young for processing. They are valuable as leverage and future labor. But as my soldiers approached the vehicle, we detected incoming human military units, not the scattered guerrillas we had been fighting, but a full company moving at maximum speed. General Mordex leaned forward. They were attempting rescue? That seems tactically sound. No, Zexloth said, his voice growing quieter. The incoming unit was not a rescue force. They were abandoning a strategic objective to protect those 30 young humans. They gave up control of a major supply depot, allowing us to advance 20 kilometers just to save 30 individuals who were not even soldiers. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The human unit fought for 72 hours. Zexloth continued. 160 soldiers against my full battalion of 3,000. They had no air support, limited ammunition, and no chance of victory. But they held position until relief forces arrived. 87% casualties. And they called it a success. He set the decoration down carefully and picked up another one. The second encounter was at a medical facility. We needed the building as a forward command post, so we moved to capture it. Inside were human medical personnel treating wounded from both sides. Admiral Threshold's tentacles curled in confusion. Both sides? They were treating our wounded? Yes. Human medical personnel had been treating injured hegemony soldiers since the first day of fighting. When we attacked their medical facility, they continued treating everyone while under direct fire. They would not abandon their patients, even enemy patients. Zexloth's cybernetic eye glowed brighter, accessing painful memories. My soldiers began to hesitate. They had wounded comrades being cared for by the humans they were supposed to be fighting. Some of my troops refused to fire on the medical facility. Others broke ranks entirely and joined the humans in protecting the wounded. Impossible, General Mordex chittered. Hegemony discipline does not break. It broke that day, Zexloth replied simply. Because we had never encountered an enemy who would die to save our lives. Our military training had no protocols for fighting people who treated us with kindness even as we tried to kill them. He picked up the third decoration, holding it with reverence. The third encounter was at a mining colony. 847 civilian humans with no military training. Miners, engineers, maintenance workers. We expected them to surrender immediately when we arrived. The display showed a small settlement built into the side of a mountain, with tunnel entrances visible in the rocky walls. They held us off for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. A full hegemony division. 20,000 soldiers with armor and air support, stopped by 800 civilians with mining equipment and improvised weapons. Counselor Yithara's crystalline form flickered rapidly. How is that possible? Civilians have no military training. They had something better, Zexloth said, his voice barely above a whisper. They had something to protect. The colony included families, young humans, elderly humans who could not be evacuated, and every single civilian in that colony chose to fight rather than let us take their home. He held up the third decoration, examining it in the light. They used mining explosives to collapse tunnel networks. They turned maintenance tools into weapons. They built barricades from furniture and mining equipment. And when we finally broke through their defenses, we found something that haunts me still. What? Admiral Threshold asked, though her voice suggested she did not want to know. They had prepared a final chamber deep in the mines. All the civilians who could not fight had gathered there. The elderly, the injured, the young, and the remaining defenders had positioned themselves between us and that chamber, knowing they could not win but determined to buy time for nothing. There was nowhere to run, no rescue coming. They fought to the end for no reason, except that surrender was not in their nature. Zexloth carefully returned the decorations to the metal box. That was when I understood why we were losing. We were fighting a species that valued everything except individual survival. They would die for their young, their old, their wounded. They would die for strangers, for principles, for the simple idea that some things are worth more than living. He looked around the room at the 12 delegates, each representing a species that had built their civilization on the logical foundation of survival above all else. We called it the doctrine of acceptable losses, he said. But we were wrong. It was not about losses being acceptable. It was about understanding what truly cannot be lost. And for humans, surrender means losing everything that makes life worth living. The room was silent, except for the soft humming of machinery. Each delegate was thinking about their own people, their own values, their own willingness to sacrifice for others. That was not the worst part, Zexloth said finally. The worst part was that they were winning. The fourth day brought a different atmosphere to the council chambers. Word of Zexloth's testimony had spread throughout the hegemony leadership. High-ranking officials who normally would never attend tactical briefings were now present, crowding the usually spacious room. They had come to hear how primitives had defeated the greatest military force in the galaxy. Zexloth entered carrying nothing this time. his forearms hanging empty at his sides. The weight of his story seemed to have grown heavier with each telling. And today, his cybernetic eye barely glowed at all. "Today I will tell you about the day we thought we had won," he began, his voice rough with exhaustion. "And about the day we learned that humans had been playing a different game than we understood." The holographic display showed the solar system from a distance, with markers indicating fleet positions and battle zones. The hegemony fleet formed a massive sphere around Earth, while smaller red dots showed human resistance scattered across the planet's surface. By the end of the second month, our ground forces controlled 70% of Earth's surface, Zexloth explained. Human resistance was scattered and apparently weakening. Their military had taken enormous casualties, their cities were damaged, and their government had stopped broadcasting from their capital. Admiral Threshko leaned forward eagerly. "They were preparing to surrender?" "That is what we thought," Zexloth replied. Then, on the 59th day of the war, something happened that we had never seen in any previous conquest. The humans left. Confused murmurs rippled through the expanded audience. Counselor Ythara's crystalline form flickered with bewilderment. "Left? You mean they fled their planet?" "Not fled. Evacuated." In the span of 6 hours, every remaining human on Earth's surface loaded into transport ships and departed the planet. Civilians, military, government officials, everyone. They abandoned their homeworld entirely. General Mordex clicked his mandibles in approval, finally showing wisdom. Total evacuation means total surrender. Zexloth's laugh was bitter and cold. "That is what I thought. I broadcast victory messages to the fleet. I reported to High Command that Earth was ours, and the human species had been broken. I prepared to begin the standard occupation and resource extraction procedures." The display zoomed in to show Earth now devoid of human presence, its cities empty, its military bases abandoned. For 3 days, we celebrated. Earth was ours. The humans had fled to their outer planets and asteroid colonies, where we could hunt them down at our leisure. I divided the fleet to begin systematic conquest of the rest of their solar system. Zexloth paused, his cybernetic eyes suddenly flaring to life, with a bright red glow. "That was when we discovered what humans call strategic withdrawal. And that was when the real war began." The display changed to show the asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets of the human system. What had appeared to be simple mining colonies and research stations now showed a different picture entirely. Every asteroid, every space station, every outpost that humans had built in their system was not what it appeared to be. They had spent decades, perhaps centuries, preparing for this moment. Every mining operation was a weapons platform. Every research station was a fortress. Every transport route was a kill zone. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The humans had not been defeated. They had been retreating to prepared positions. They had turned their entire solar system into a weapon, Zexloth continued, and when they activated it, they showed us what happens when a species that has been practicing war for thousands of years gets to choose the battlefield. The display showed a date and timestamp, then began playing what appeared to be sensor recordings from hegemony ships. "This was the day of 9 suns, Zexloth said quietly. "The day humans showed us that their mining operations could be turned into weapons of a scale we had never imagined." The recording showed 9 brilliant beams of light erupting from different points in the asteroid belt. Each beam was wider than a hegemony dreadnought and carried energy that made their main weapons look like children's toys. "Industrial mining lasers," Zexloth explained as the delegates watched in horror. "Designed to crack open asteroids the size of small moons. Humans had been building them for decades under the cover of resource extraction. 9 beams, each one carrying the focused power of a star, fired in perfect coordination. The recording showed what happened to the hegemony ships caught in those beams. The massive vessels that had seemed invincible simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not damaged, completely disintegrated. 12,000 ships gone in the first 30 seconds, Zexloth said, his voice empty of emotion. "The largest single loss in hegemony military history. And that was just the opening move." General Mordex's chittering had stopped entirely. "Impossible. No species has weapons of that scale. They did not build weapons of that scale, Zexloth replied. They built industrial equipment of that scale, then turned it into weapons when they needed to. Everything they had built for peace became an instrument of war. The display shifted to show communication intercepts from the following days. Text scrolled across the screen in various human languages, all translated into hegemony standard. But the true horror was not their weapons, Zexloth continued. The true horror was what they did to our soldiers' minds. Admiral Threshold's tentacles curled nervously. Psychological warfare? Mental attacks? Nothing so simple, Zexloth said. Somehow, humans had infiltrated our communication networks, not to steal intelligence or disrupt our operations. They began broadcasting messages directly to our troops. Personal messages. The display showed examples of these intercepts. Stories about human families taking care of alien refugees from previous hegemony conquests. Images of human children playing with pets that belonged to species the hegemony had enslaved. Videos of humans sharing food with hegemony prisoners of war. They told our soldiers about their own families, Zexloth continued. About human children who had lost parents in the war but still sent drawings to wounded alien soldiers in human hospitals. About human doctors who worked without sleep to save the lives of hegemony troops. About human engineers who designed more comfortable prison facilities for captured aliens. The room was completely silent now. Every delegate understood what they were hearing. The humans had not tried to break enemy morale through fear or despair. They had tried to build it through hope and compassion. The effect on our troops was unprecedented, Zexloth said. Soldiers began to question why they were fighting, not from fear of death, but from confusion about whether they were fighting the right enemy. He gestured to the communication logs scrolling past on the display. Mass defections began on day 67. Entire units laid down their weapons and requested permission to surrender, not because they could not fight, but because they could not understand why they should fight people who offered medical care to their enemies and comfort to their prisoners. Counselor Yitharaz's light flickered rapidly. The humans corrupted our forces through kindness. They weaponized their own compassion, Zexloth confirmed. They made us see them not as enemies to be conquered, but as people to be protected. They took soldiers who had been trained to kill without question and made them question everything. The display showed a final image. Human ships approaching disabled hegemony vessels. Not to destroy them, but to offer medical assistance to the crews. When we were broken and scattered, when our fleet was in ruins and our soldiers were deserting in massive numbers, the humans sent us a message, Zexloth said. Not a demand for surrender. Not a threat of destruction. An invitation. He looked around the room at the dozens of alien officials who had gathered to hear his story. They invited us to talk. They offered medical aid to our wounded, food to our hungry, and safe passage to any who wanted to leave. They offered to end the war not through victory, but through conversation. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Admiral Threshold's tentacles trembling against the table. That, Zexloth said finally, was when I realized that we had never been fighting a war at all. We had been stumbling through the early stages of the most important first contact in galactic history, and humanity had been trying to teach us how to be worthy of their friendship. The fifth morning arrived with news that shook the hegemony to its foundation. 3 more species had formally requested withdrawal from planned conquest operations. 2 others had begun unofficial negotiations with human diplomatic vessels that had somehow appeared at the edges of their territories. The council chambers, packed beyond capacity for 4 days, now held representatives from nearly every member species of the galactic hegemony. Zexloth entered for the final time, but he was no longer alone. Behind him walked a human female, small by galactic standards, but carrying herself with quiet dignity. She wore simple clothes and bore no weapons, yet her presence caused a ripple of shock through the assembled delegates. Honored members, Zexloth began, his voice stronger than it had been in days. I present Ambassador Sarah Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. She has come to answer your questions about humanity's intentions regarding the galactic hegemony. The human female stepped forward and bowed slightly in the manner of her species. When she spoke, her voice was calm and carried easily across the silent chamber. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," she said in perfect hegemony standard. "I understand that Commander Zexloth has been telling you about our recent conflict. I am here to tell you about what happened after the fighting stopped." Zexloth moved to stand beside the human, a sight that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. "When the last battle ended," Zexloth said, "when my fleet lay broken in Earth's orbit and my armies were scattered across the solar system, we expected the humans to do what any victorious species would do: demand tribute, take prisoners, claim territory. Instead, they did something that changed my understanding of what victory means." Quote, Ambassador Chen gestured to the holographic display, which showed images of human ships moving among the wreckage of the hegemony fleet. "We offered immediate medical assistance to all wounded, regardless of species," she explained. "We opened our hospitals to treat injuries that our own doctors had never seen before. We shared our food with hungry soldiers who had been trying to kill us days earlier. But that was not the shocking part," Zexloth continued. "The shocking part was the invitation that Ambassador Chen delivered personally to my flagship." The human female smiled slightly, an expression that somehow conveyed both sadness and hope. "We invited the hegemony leadership to Earth," she said simply. "Not for surrender negotiations. Not for war crimes trials. For dinner." The assembled delegates stirred uncomfortably. General Mordex's chittering grew agitated. "Dinner?" he demanded. "You invited the forces that had attacked your world to dinner? Coffee, actually," Ambassador Chen replied. "It is a human tradition. When we have a disagreement with someone, we sit down together and talk it out over food and drink. We find that it is very difficult to see someone as an enemy when you are sharing a meal with them." Zexloth's cybernetic eye glowed softly as he accessed the memory. "I attended that dinner," he said. "I sat at a table with humans whose cities I had bombed, whose soldiers I had killed, whose children I had orphaned. And they served me food from their own family's recipes. They asked about my homeworld, my culture, my family. They treated me not as a defeated enemy, but as a guest." Admiral Threshold's tentacles writhed in confusion. "What was their demand? What did they want from you in exchange?" "That was what terrified me most," Zexloth admitted. "They wanted nothing from me. They wanted nothing from the hegemony. They simply wanted to understand why we thought conquest was necessary, and to show us that there were other ways to build relationships between species." Ambassador Chen activated a new section of the holographic display, showing star charts that many delegates recognized. "In the 5 years since the war ended," she explained, 43 former hegemony member species have requested to join what we now call the Terran Friendship Coalition, not through conquest, not through economic pressure, but through simple invitation. The star charts showed trade routes, cultural exchange programs, joint research projects, and defensive alliances that spanned dozens of star systems. Each species that joins our coalition keeps their own government, their own culture, their own way of life. Ambassador Chen continued, "We ask only that they commit to resolving conflicts through discussion rather than violence, and that they help protect other species from those who would force them into submission." Counselor Ythara's crystalline form flickered rapidly. "You are describing an empire built on voluntary participation?" "We are describing a community built on friendship," Ambassador Chen replied. "Because we learned something important during our brief war with the hegemony. The strongest bonds between people are not chains forged in conquest. They are bonds chosen freely by those who recognize shared values." Zexloth stepped forward, his scarred face serious. "I came to this council to warn you about human military capabilities," he said. "I told you about their weapons, their tactics, their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. All of that was true, but it was not the most important truth." He looked around the room at the dozens of species represented, each one weighing their options for the future. "The most important truth is that humans do not measure victory by how many enemies they destroy," he continued. "They measure victory by how many enemies they transform into friends." Ambassador Chen touched a control, and the display changed to show a single image that stunned the assembled delegates into complete silence. It was a photograph of Zexloth himself, but not the scarred warrior they knew. This was Zexloth, standing with a group of human children, at what appeared to be a school, teaching them about Kethmari culture. Commander Zexloth now serves as humanity's primary ambassador to the Kethmari Republic, Ambassador Chen explained. He helps prevent conflicts before they start, by ensuring that different species understand each other. He has probably done more to build peace in the galaxy than any single individual in the last century. Zexloth's cybernetic eye dimmed as he looked at his own image. They took a weapon of war, and turned me into an instrument of peace, he said quietly. Not through force, not through programming, but by showing me what I could become if I chose to be better than I was. General Mordex's mandibles clicked nervously. What do they expect from the hegemony? Surely there must be terms, conditions, demands? Ambassador Chen smiled again, that same expression of hopeful sadness. They expect us to be better than we have been, Zexloth answered before she could speak. They expect us to choose cooperation over conquest. They expect us to protect the weak instead of exploiting them. They expect us to build instead of destroy. And if we refuse? Admiral Thresh-Cole asked, though her tentacles had stopped writhing and hung still. Then you will be alone, Ambassador Chen replied simply, because every species in this region of the galaxy will eventually have to choose between the old way of conquest and submission, or the new way of cooperation and mutual support. And we have learned that when given a real choice, most people choose friendship over fear. Zexloth began moving toward the door, then stopped and turned back to address the council one final time. You asked me to tell you about human warfare, he said. I have done so. But the most important thing I can tell you is this. Humans fight not because they love war, but because they love peace. And they will fight anyone, defeat anyone, sacrifice anything to build a galaxy where their children can live in friendship with children of every species. He paused at the doorway, looking back at the assembled representatives of the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever known. I came here to warn you about human military power, he said. Instead, I find myself hoping that you will give them the chance to show you the real power they possess. What power is that? Counselor Yathara asked softly. Zexloth's scarred face showed the closest thing to a smile his species could manage. The power to help us become worthy of our own children's respect, he said. The power to build a galaxy where strength is measured not by how much you can destroy, but by how much you can create. The power to transform a universe built on fear into one built on hope. As he left the chamber with Ambassador Chen, Zexloth's final words echoed in the silence. That is the power that breaks galaxies, honored delegates. Not the power to conquer them, but the power to heal them. The council sat in complete silence for long minutes after they were gone, each delegate contemplating a choice that would define the future of their species. Outside the chamber windows, stars shone in the darkness, waiting to see whether the galaxy would choose the path of ancient conquest or the uncertain road toward something that had never been tried before. Universal friendship. In the end, the choice would be simpler than any of them had imagined, because when someone offers you the chance to be better than you are, the only real question is whether you have the courage to accept their faith in your potential.